Hello and welcome to the future of classical music. I'm David Taylor, and this is my show about big ideas and the people behind them. Today, I'm talking with Jocelyn Burnham, a speaker and AI communicator from AI for Culture. AI is ever present in our news cycle, and a technology that both will and is transforming the world that we live in. On the one hand, it has incredible potential, making huge leaps forward in scientific research, productivity, and creative tools. But, on the other hand, it is also a threat to jobs and the creative industries. I recently met Jocelyn at a conference, and I loved her deliberately neutral approach to talking about AI and encouraging us all to play with the tools to improve our AI literacy and help us inform our thoughts, both positive and negative. There is so much value to this approach that I thought she'd be a great person to dig into everything AI with, whether you're a musician or work at a large organisation. We talk about how embracing play can help us understand AI, the possible roles AI can play in our culture, how it could impact the administrative and artistic side of our jobs, and some of the ethical and environmental concerns of AI, before digging into how to get started on your AI journey. Right, that's enough from me. Let's jump in. Jocelyn, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Definitely. Well, we're going to talk about everything AI today, but I couldn't really do you justice, so I'd love for you to introduce yourself and what you do in the world.
Oh, I need to get better at this. I need to kind of have my elevator pitch. So I'm Jocelyn Burnham. So I've worked in the culture sector for about 10 years. So I've been at Sadler's Wells, marketing campaigns manager at Brighton Festival. And then for the last couple of years, I've been working fully independent, freelance around AI and how it interacts with culture and what that means and where we align ourselves and how we learn and all of that stuff. And I've worked with organisations like the Tate, Shakespeare's Globe, Audience Agency. I've given lectures at places like the Royal Academy of Arts, London School of Economics, Royal Welsh Academy of Music and Drama. So I kind of hop around doing projects, workshops, learning sessions. I think I've done a science festival show at one point. And just kind of seeing what comes up and seeing what conversations are worth having and what's interesting to learn about.
Amazing. And we met at a conference recently, and I was so taken aback by your approach to discussing AI. It's not that we should tear it down and it's the devil, but equally it's not that it's this incredible messiah thing that will transform society and we should just throw all our guardrails away. It was much more explorative and playful, which I thought would be a wonderful approach to share.
With AI and maybe with lots of things these days, there's a real expectation that we have like one extreme position or the other, that either we love it, we need to learn about it yesterday and all this stuff, or we hate it, it's all slop, it's all homogenizing everything. And actually, I always think there's much more interesting conversations in the middle when you get more personal and more informed. So that's hopefully where I like to come from.
Definitely. So what we're going to do to begin with is take this as a conversation from like ground zero. So to wind the clock back, AI is quite a difficult thing to kind of label. It's something we talk about a lot, but we don't really know what it is, despite the fact it's been around for a long time. AI research began sort of 1950s, and please correct me when I'm wrong. AI was also those big giant computers playing chess in the 70s and 80s. Google Maps is technically kind of an AI. And yet, all of a sudden, the last few years, we talk about it nonstop. When we talk about it now, what do we mean by AI?
Yeah, really good point. And also, it's kind of contentious, isn't it? Because if you make the argument that, well, AI has always been with us, we've always been using it, that can also be an attempt to normalize some of it too. So it's what you call AI, I think, is really interesting. A lot of what we're talking about now sort of comes after 2017. So it's some advances that Google did with transformer architecture. I won't get too technical, but basically there are a couple of breakthroughs that allowed the current generation of large language models, some of the stuff we're seeing with media generation. So when I talk about generative AI, I'm mostly talking about stuff after 2017, maybe starting around 2022 with things like Midjourney, kind of a very powerful image generator. So yeah, what you call AI and what you refer to when you talk about AI literacy and all that itself is really interesting because that can almost position a view there too. Um, you can make the argument that we've all been using AI since we've been using spell check. Um, and that's fair, but also, it depends what point you're trying to get across when you say that.
Definitely. I think looking back that Clippy may not be the big AI goal that
He's
we the company
he's
aspirations
coming
are.
he's coming back. People are fans of Clippy. There's a whole movement to bring back Clippy.
Oh, I'm all up for that. It's perfect. Would be a good distinction be sort of this language model that we now have, that this new chapter in means you can have a conversation where you write into a text box and it discerns tasks rather than click on thing and get a result based on small physical prompts.
I would say so. I think there is a meaningful difference, especially with language models, sort of pre and post ChatGPT. That really was one of the big game changers. But then the media models as well, shortly after that, and then afterwards with creating images, music, video around the same time too. So yeah, I would completely say that we're looking sort of late 2022, early 2023. It's sort of the takeoff point of a lot of the conversations now.
Definitely. So for this chat, I thought it'd be great to break it down into almost two parts. One being around how people in culture can use AI as part of their day-to-day work, and that could either be organizations or individuals, sort of behind the scenes of the art. And the next step would be actually within the art itself, if that makes sense. But before we get into there, we've got this huge spectrum of what AI can be. So what do you see as AI's role in culture?
Okay, great question. Great question. So I should say at the top, my whole thing is neutrality. Um,
So I've
because
just given you a really bad question then.
no, but it's great because this is exactly where it often comes to, is, I never put forward the idea that AI is good or bad inherently. I think often what we get is every different sector and every different sub job within that sector, and then every person's individual experience, and then every person's individual values, all creates this, incredibly complicated Venn diagram, which you can't really describe verbally, but it basically leads to the idea that where AI tends to be useful and tends not to be is going to be radically different depending on your judgment of quality, the kind of work that you're doing, and the experience that you have too. So there's really no one size fits all in like what actually produces like good results, or if AI even does produce good results. I don't champion it as something which people should learn because it will necessarily produce good results. I think often it's a case that you might discover things that you find useful, but equally, a lot of the reasons to learn AI might be because other people are using it in other sectors of society, and that will begin to interact more and more in loads of ways with the work that you do and sort of the society you live in. So I always sort of say it's not about loving, it's about learning. And in the same way that you might want to learn about nuclear power, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're then going to be an advocate of nuclear power, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I know that can be a bit of a fiddly one, but I think it's an interesting conversation that empowering the individual to believe that their own perspectives are most valuable, that's actually become the work, I think.
Really good point. So if we were to take that as like our starting point of like an exploration of learning, if we were to say look at the work side of what AI could do for organizations and individuals, what could AI's role be in those aspects?
Yeah, sure. So normally when we talk about like AI and work, we're sort of talking about like one of three things. Either doing work faster, which is I think what a lot of people kind of revert to when they think of AI. They think of efficiency, quickness, speeding up processes. This is almost like where a lot of people begin. Then you might move on to, well, actually improving quality of work. So how can we maybe audit our ideas? How can we kind of strength test different assumptions? How can we, kind of even if it takes longer, how can we build something we're more proud of? That's in the second kind of tier. And then the third tier is how can we do things that we've never done before? So, maybe teaching our marketing team how to code with AI to create interactive experiences, or how we can get really personalized ways of learning software, screen sharing stuff. I'm dyslexic. I use AI to help me with my reading and memorization, stuff like that. So it's sort of those three streams. And I think often where you go with it depends on which of those three things you find most interesting. And I suspect, and my work, I think, confirms, at least from my own perspective, that most people actually aren't that bothered about efficiency in arts and culture. There's this idea, and I think it's been kind of brought over from the business side, that AI is going to be important because it's going to make you more efficient. And I don't think most of us do our jobs because we're obsessed with efficiency. It's like the Alan Watts line: you don't work the piano, you play the piano. Um, so I think that a lot of the more interesting innovations seem to come from those second two areas about actually how can we use it, if we use it, to build quality, and maybe much more excitingly, how can we do something with it that no sector has considered to do before, and actually we can lead the way because we have access to, like, weird, creative, lovely minds, and we might be able to build things that no one's considered.
That's a really interesting point. That in essence, this could be a creative outlet in a more functional way that isn't building art, but is building either experiences or making websites more accessible or interactive, and those sort of pathways that could be interesting, or again, like administration in a way that isn't necessarily more productive, but is enabling of creativity. Although you mentioned leading the way, I know it's going to be impossible to ask for examples of like how we could lead the way, because in essence you'd have to predict the future. But what are some things you've seen that have led the way and have been interesting that we could maybe take some inspiration from?
Yeah, I mean, I take a lot of inspiration from the internet, to be honest, and how creative people used that, different ways that they kind of challenged assumptions on what tech could be for. The British Council just put out a great publication called Why Technology Needs Artists, and there's like 40 different essays, perspectives in there of how actual sort of creative minds and approaches are fantastic ways to innovate with tech in unexpected ways. As far as like what I'm seeing, I mean, I'm always wary to cherry pick examples because every time an example actually makes it out of an organization, there might well have been 40 that were complete failures. And so I have to be very careful not to sort of overly positive it. I know that access is something a lot of people are looking at with AI, and especially, maybe been working with some dance organizations that are very interested in how perhaps they can have visual description, audio descriptions of things which are happening on stage. Things like that are some of the areas people are exploring. People are also exploring, interactive experiences. I think coding is a big one for people who are enjoying that. But mostly it's not really what the organizations themselves are putting out, which tends to be where the conversation goes. It's more sort of what one individual and one team with their kind of, because everyone's got their own weird brains and idiosyncratic habits and ways of learning. It's more what's helping them and how that's wrapping around their work style, their experience to produce something that they like. So it's not really about, at least what I've seen, an organization coming to a big AI project that's really glossy and putting it out. It seems to be much more individual, quite specific, and then often radically different depending on the person. So some people might think it's brilliant for copywriting, and they've absolutely, it's the work, the bit of their job they hate most, and they've managed to, see quality in that. The person sat next to them might despise AI copy, but perhaps they found it useful for putting in their blood tests and, getting questions they can talk to their doctor about. And the person to their left might hate everything to do with it and actually want to learn about it so they can defend the copyright interests of the artists they work with. So each individual might have like a radically different kind of frame of it. But within that, sometimes you do get things that they do find helpful, but equally, there'll be things that they do hate too.
Yeah, certainly. There's such a wide range. And I think it's really fascinating. You've pointed out that individuals sat next to each other will often have very different use cases, but also thought processes and opinions. Just to go back to the idea of exploring and learning, if, say, for example, someone who's listening to this who is either a musician or an administrator, and taking again the music side of it out, if they want to get going to learn or to play, what sorts of tools out aside from ChatGPT do you recommend going and sort of getting to grips with to learn a bit more?
Yeah, great question. I mean, my whole thing is that you learn fastest through being playful. You learn fastest not thinking what's most important, but what's most interesting, and then really following that and soaking it up. Because the more you follow what's most interesting, the quicker you generally absorb concepts and ideas that might be useful to you in different domains of AI. It depends. I mean, I would just try a whole bunch of stuff. Music generators are interesting to look at, things like Udio and Suno, just to get a sense of what they can do. Video generators, people are having a lot of fun with those. You can type in VO3 into YouTube and kind of see what people are making with that. I think one of the best places to start with AI is probably coding, um, because with images, with music, with a lot of this stuff, it's not particularly new in a way to people who work in culture. It can often scratch at something which we don't like, and it can bring out different types of feelings. Coding, though, I think a lot of people who work in culture haven't done much coding, and being able to do something that's a completely fresh domain, I think can be quite inspiring. So I think maybe making like a little video game is a great place to start. You can use ChatGPT for that. You could use Google AI Studio. They put their latest models on there. And if you don't know how to do it, ask the model. Say I want to create, a simple retro game. How can I do it? It'll walk you through it. And then within an hour, or much less than that, you'll have something playable. And the feeling of making maybe your first game, I think it's a real rush. When I do that in workshops, that seems to be the moment where people are like, oh, cool, I can do this for some. Whereas if you're an artist and you're making it for images, it might just annoy you, basically. So I think find whatever it is that lets you do something fresh, and then just follow your curiosity. I think that's a fun way to go.
I love that in a way because that takes sort of the work side out where you might feel pressure to do something or be coming in with previous connotations of what it should be, but as a totally different thing of, well, what can I do with this, and like shaking the box and trying to work out what to do with it is a really exciting way to do.
Well, that's kind of my whole MO is, and this is the chip I have on my shoulder, is, I think a lot of the time the culture sector is being told by technology companies how they should use their products. And don't get me wrong, they're interesting products, but I think we don't need that. I think we're going to find stuff on our own terms if we choose to use it. And we'll probably use it in a way that nobody in that company had considered that we might use it for, or not. Or we'll use it, we'll discover criticisms about it, and then maybe we'll integrate that into some of our responses to it in the way we operate or create art or whatever. So I think my whole thing is like, let's take some power back. Let's discover ourselves how we work with this, create our own rule book, and then we can kind of let go of how the business community or other areas are using it, because we don't really need that. We can create our own rules.
Brilliant. I think it goes back to creativity, to what you've just been saying, and that feels to me a much less scary place than, will this come and take my job? Is it going to be something that will like ruin the art going forwards? But if it is, oh, I get to be in charge of this and I get to find a way of using it in a way that is energizing and interesting, feels like a much better starting point.
I think so. I think that there's a lot of agency building to be done. It can be very intimidating and overwhelming thinking about AI and reading all these articles and seeing this stuff come out. And I think that can put people into kind of an anxious, overwhelmed headspace where you almost just want, a tutorial to be told to you of how to use it. And then you're and in a way, that overwhelmed space is the worst one to be in, because it makes you very passive. It makes you stop contributing to the conversation. It makes you sort of feel like somebody from California is going to teach you how to do something which will change your job. And it's this headspace I think there's no reason for us to have as a sector. I think that we have amazing innovation in the culture and heritage and art sector. I think that we can repurpose stuff in a really fun way. And I think raising our voices, getting our confidence up that actually our perspectives are important, that's only just starting to happen, I think. And I think that will only be a good thing as that continues.
Definitely, and I think particularly because the narrative recently has been very much dominated by, I was gonna say the word excitement, potentially just like overhype of AI in a way that is akin to like the dot-com boom in the past, of these giant things being shouted at and companies just putting AI or releasing AI products because it's good for investors, not necessarily because it's a product that should be in the public sphere. Kind of feels we're being told and it's being forced on, and actually this readdressing is probably beneficial.
I completely agree. And, part of my work, I work with artists, I work with organizations. One day I might be working with an artist who's obsessed over one part of AI and wants to go further with it and wants to figure out how to branch that and is actually genuinely quite excited. And then the next day it might be an organization that sees this as the devil, does not want anything to do with it, and is like, how can we fight this in every single way? So you have to be able to kind of, at least for me, I've realized my own opinion is the least important part. What's much more interesting is each individual and being able to apply their experience, their abilities, plus confidence. That will usually bring out the best thing.
Definitely. And I was just thinking as well that sort of these unusual applications that are being forced on us and sort of can put us off. I recently was looking for a new electric toothbrush, and one of the ones that was I was looking at uh, had Bluetooth connectivity that went to an app that would use AI learning to analyze how while I was brushing my teeth. It's like I don't think I need it forcing down my throat that much in terms of AI. Like there's
Oh, I
some things
know.
that are fine, and then the consequences. Then like, well, I don't want to interact. It feels bullshitty, for want of a better phrase. Whereas
It
actually, there's lots
does.
of really interesting, exciting things that we could be doing.
It does. I think it was Thomas Hassabis from Google who said something I really like, which is AI is probably overhyped in the short term and maybe underhyped in the long term. But it does feel forced on you right now. You know, you open up WhatsApp and suddenly it has AI mode. You different services you use every day suddenly want you to use, the AI stuff. And it is quite frustrating. And I think it just reminds me that like we need to have confidence in building our own experiences and not being passive consumers of this, because ultimately this isn't being developed with the culture sector at this point. This is being developed with business interests, national interests, and we're sort of just repurposing it as best we can. So I think that there is something there about how do we make the world we're going into one that suits us, and how do we get there? How do we learn enough to get there? That's kind of where my brain often goes.
Definitely. So moving away from our world of work into our world of art. I'm not going to say what do you think is AI's role in creating art. What are the options for using AI in creating art that we could potentially go away and play with?
Yeah, this is the thing, right? AI often isn't what will end up on canvas or on stage. Like, it could be, yeah, what reminds a creative person to drink more water and go to bed early, or what helps them learn about a complex topic that they wouldn't have otherwise engaged with. I've created, it's like a 20,000 word document that talks about like my life, learning styles, experiences, values, what I'm generally good at, what I'm generally rubbish at. I've tried to put everything I can into this. And one of my favorite things is to upload this to something like maybe Google Notebook LM. And then I might put in a bunch of academic articles that have just come out, maybe in something which is radically different to what I normally would read about, some branch of science or branch of academia. And then I'll say, based on what you know about me, what are some things in these articles I might find provocative, or I might find useful, or I might hate, or how can this engage with me in some way? And then based on that, often I get quite inspired to then sort of think, okay, this is an emerging idea that I wouldn't have otherwise ever really seen or got to before. And then I might make something which responds to that. So again, it's individual. I can talk about how I find it interesting and engaging. But I think it will be so different depending on what area of work you're doing. I love anything that provokes you. I love anything that inspires you. But as far as like what people do that actually ends up on screen or stage, I don't think we've seen that much at this point. Um, I think there's a great amount of skepticism of AI in the culture sector, and I think that a lot of people would probably be quite fearful of doing something which seemed as if it was championing it in some way. Um, but I think individual creatives are exploring it, and I think that it's also sorry, this is a bit of a left field thing, but it also depends who you call creatives, because you get into this view of like which groups do we officially call the creatives. And actually one of the things you're seeing really with AI is people who wouldn't maybe have otherwise engaged in certain forms of creativity, who are now making things, who are now getting involved in things, who are now using AI to create graphic novels based on stories they have, and putting those online and getting feedback, or writing lyrics and making AI songs. And these might be people who, aren't in our little sort of safe little orbit that we call the creative sector, but are humans who are enjoying this, feeling empowered by it. So who am I to say that that's a bad thing? So I think, yeah, it really depends on who you ask and what you consider to be like valid creativity.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point. I hadn't considered this idea that it could enable people who are creatives with a tool to become creatives who may not have had a mechanism or outlet for it historically. Sort of to go pre our current definition of AI, looking at people who use GarageBand to generate music, who historically would have no musical performance or instrumental skills, didn't know how to read music, and yet by using software were able to create incredible music and learn on to become producers and things.
Yeah,
And in essence, yeah, it's going forward as an AI tool.
yeah, and I can see where that comes from, and I think there's both conversation there about like I don't know, you can get into the structure of society quite quick with that. Certain types of creative work are seen as more legitimate if you've been to the right schools, you've had the right apprenticeships, you've sort of been part of a respectable company, and then you're almost seen as having license to produce certain things in the world. And I think that there is something really interesting to explore about how perhaps certain forms of creative kind of roles are slightly gatekept by that philosophy. And there is something destabilizing about the idea that now, some random kid in a basement can produce, a piece of animation with a great story, which somebody with a whole team perhaps wouldn't have put together in that time or to that quality. And that's destabilizing, it's jarring. And I think that's why it can bring up a lot of emotions. But I think it's useful to reflect on maybe, how we perceive where legitimate creativity comes from.
Really good point. I want to dive into that a little bit more. A resource that I love to look back on for AI is the Royal Institute Christmas Lectures. And one of those historically was all on AI. And if you don't know these Christmas lectures, they are for children. They are on around the Christmas period. And there's a different topic every year, but they dive into quite complex topics and themes and ideas. And the AI one was fascinating, and credit to them, they were asking the young people in the audience, what is art? Which is a never-ending question going forwards. And we see now that we're having this debate around, is something that AI generates art or not? And I was thinking recently about in the news, there was a band called Velvet Sundown, which turned out to be purely AI generated. All their artwork and the people who were in the artwork were AI generated. The music and the lyrics were, and they were generating, I think it was just under a month, 1 million views on Spotify every month. Again, I know you don't prescribe what to believe when it comes to AI, but do you have any thoughts around what is art and what is creativity in music when it comes to AI things that are generated?
Yeah, I love that question because I've had a lot of fun making, AI songs and writing lyrics, and it did feel exciting. It did feel like I was engaging with a part of myself, and it was a valuable experience to me. It was something which to me I wouldn't write off as a novelty. I was really putting some work into it. Don't know if it was any good, but the experience of it itself was something which I took value from. You know, Humans are inherently creative. It's sort of like what we do. I think that when we meet a new tool, we're going to be creative with it in some way. What is art? I have no idea. I mean, I suppose it's something which might provoke you. It's something which you exist to make the inside of you more on the outside of you. Different definitions. But when it comes to AI stuff, I mean, often we might think of something as human made or AI made. And I think often that's really not the case. It's sometimes a real mixture of the two. Like even with that music example, I was writing lyrics which might not have been any good, but I was certainly putting my little heart and soul into them. And to me, that was a fusion. That was me using AI with using some of my unique humanness to make something. And I think a lot of the time it becomes that blurry in between. Or if you even use AI to help you learn a skill, does that then become an extension of AI, the fact that you're now using that skill? So it's this really blurry area of where it kind of starts and ends. And even if you produce, 500 AI images, but you as a human pick one for a certain situation, which you think that will be suitable for, you've still then, smudged your humanness all over it. So I think often that line feels like it should be more clear cut, but in reality, we often find it's not. And that's one of the reasons why creating policies around this stuff in particular is very difficult, because where do you draw the line?
Definitely. And I think that line has been blurred pre-AI in a way we've not necessarily acknowledged, thinking of Photoshop and the way you can manipulate images there and different elements. Again, is it all or nothing and binary, and therefore lots of stuff we've been doing for years pre our current iteration of AI also would fall into that. So it's such an interesting area that's to go forwards to keep having these conversations and varying views about.
Yeah, completely. And, again, I think every person is best placed to be in that conversation. It shouldn't just be people from the tech side who are talking about what is art and how does art interact with tech. I want to hear more artists have that conversation. I want to hear different people like from different groups and organizations and countries get more into that. So it's not just people in California on podcasts, talking about what artists should be doing. I'm getting sick of that. I want, actual people who are doing this stuff for a living to have these conversations. And I think we're starting to get there. Um, so that's why I'm inherently hopeful that I think so far we haven't really seen how artists themselves or creative people repurpose this stuff and react to it. I think we're not there, but we're about to be. And I think that's going to get to something very interesting.
Definitely. Do you have any sort of ideas as to what areas that exciting and interesting thing could be in?
Oh, I don't. I mean, I think that coding is going to be a big one. I think that when we get creative people realizing how much they can do with code and how expansive that is, having bits of software that interact with objects in your house, interact with your fridge, being able to produce simulations about what it's like to be yourself and creating empathy for different groups of people through like these games that you can make. I think that's going to be amazing. I think just that, there are so many areas of AI which are interesting, but just the idea that we're about to enter a world where all creative people now can create some sort of interactive tool or experience, that alone I think is going to be amazing. So where it goes, I'm always just curious and following what I see, and I'm always surprised by it. But that's one in particular that I would be surprised if it wasn't sort of a big part of how people experiment with it.
Love that. Really exciting. Well, obviously, AI has these big issues and talking points. Some of them align with talking points that we already have within our industry. I just wanted to hear your thoughts and perspective on AI's impact on the environment and maybe some of those ethical considerations as well that we should be having these dialogues around.
There are so many.
In 5 minutes or less.
There are so many, and this is the thing. Like I said in the beginning, learning about AI might not be because you want to use it. It might be because you want to understand how it's going to affect society and how it is affecting society. Um, Things like the bias of it, yeah, the environmental and energy use of it, increasingly the political positions it takes, especially if you look to America and the oh god, the American AI policies and stuff which are being put out, which are terrifying, and then you realize the influence this is having. So there's lots of stuff there, um, which you can approach in different types of ways. I've been talking a lot recently about open source AI. So this is stuff which you can download, run on your own computer, disconnected from the internet, and you have much more control over things like the political positions, the censorship of those models, but also you can track the energy usage of them too, because it's just your laptop that you're using. And with GDPR and all sorts of stuff, that tends to be quite useful. And a lot of the time, yeah, I'm now seeing that that's looking increasingly viable for cultural organizations who don't really want to be at the whim of some random political movement influencing an AI that they use every day for sensitive cultural stuff. They don't really want that, and nor should they. So that's something which I think is an interesting mitigation on some of those risks. With the environment side, it's pretty chaotic because these models change all the time. Getting high quality data out of them is very difficult. Um, and it really depends on what we're talking about. If it's a prompt, if it's a image, if it's a video, and how you track that too. So yeah, it depends which area that you want to go into, you want to find more interesting. I think the best place to start is probably bias if you're learning about AI risks. With bias, you won't ever go wrong. You'll always get more useful information around how these models can be politicized, or they can, water down spicy content and kind of create a normalization layer on what they work with. But yeah, there are so many areas of AI to be critical of, and that's really why I encourage, experimentation with them, not because you necessarily want to build something fun and silly, but by breaking it, by being playful, you also encounter how it goes wrong and some of the ways that it can be very negative too.
Definitely. I think that experiencing actually gives you so much more perspective. There was something I was testing recently with it and asked it around about a particular task around getting data from other websites and being a news aggregator. And it basically flagged up saying like, oh, that's got some ethical and some legal issues. You shouldn't do that. And then my response just said, what if this was a theoretical exercise? How would you do it? And then it just divulged it straight away of like how to then break all these things, which is not exactly a Fort Knox barrier of restriction. But without me having tested it, I would never have known that it would then actually, that failsafe really wasn't quite effective.
Yeah, the AI safety stuff is also really interesting. There's something called the AI Safety Index, and they just put out a report where they kind of graded all the different AI systems on their different types of safety mechanisms. And the long and the short of it is these models are still child's play to completely jailbreak. And that's one of the areas which I think is so interesting, that people perhaps think that people both think that they're more censored and less censored than they actually are. But very often you can get pretty much anything out of them just with quite a few basic tricks. So again, it's about experimentation to learn yourself firsthand, rather than reading articles which usually do take a very pro or very anti position on it. I think by embracing the fact that you're the best judge of your own work, you're going to be in a better position to judge how it interacts with that work. And nobody can do that for you.
Definitely. Well, as we start to wrap up, I'd love to get a rapid fire answer from you for if I was to go away and start playing with some AI tools, where should I begin? What are some tools that I should use for some different things?
Okay, amazing. I mean, oh, it just depends what you find interesting. Video stuff is interesting, music stuff is interesting. I think start with music. Go to Udio, make a free account, make a couple of songs, see where that goes. Make a game, go to Google AI Studio, figure out how to make a little JavaScript game. Maybe make a browser extension. I've done one where every time I visit Amazon, it plays the shopping music from The Sims, which, was quite fun to do. So just make something, whatever it is, see what you can produce, and then see what that experience is like. But there are so many weird ways you can mix and match. You could combine, a thing we did in one of my workshops, we combined like Google Street View with an AI, and we turned it into like a museum curator of like all the trash you were seeing on the street and stuff. So just follow your individual creativeness and have a play. And as you're playing, remember that you're learning both how to use the system, but also you're learning how to critique it. You're seeing where it's good, where it fails, and then you're kind of extrapolating those ideas to other things it could do, or importantly, ways that people could use it for harm too. So I think just being playful, experimenting. By all means, use YouTube. YouTube is a great place to start, see what people are making. And then just let yourself have permission to do open-ended experimentation.
I love that. It's such a positive take on getting to grips with such a complex topic, and playful is a great place to start. So, a couple of questions I ask at the end of everyone. I know that you work in culture, but we're going to try and narrow the lens to classical music. If you could change one thing in the classical music industry, what would it be and why?
I've only worked in classical music to the extent that I manage campaigns for classical performances, like at Brighton Dome and stuff, and conversations I've had in that sector. I know it always comes back to things like education, to kind of building up kind of a sense of ownership of what you're seeing, and kind of giving people a little bit of excitement of having their own learning journeys with stuff. I don't know. That's a great question. No, I don't know. I don't know. I think just generally more opportunities for people from different types of backgrounds to learn about it, to experience it. And I think probably increased education for music too in schools.
Wonderful. And then a real positive note to end on. What gives you hope for the future of classical music, and where do you see opportunity?
I think that humans are just so inherently creative that with it linking to AI, I think the opportunity to learn with these systems is starting to take off, where you can get to the point now where you could have a webcam, on the piano, and you can at least get to grips with some of the basics of learning an instrument or trying something out, and gradually building up a little bit of a baseline of confidence.
Well,
we're getting there now, and that to me seems only positive, that it lowers the barrier to entry on maybe not needing a private tutor for the initial steps. I don't know. This is the thing. I'm really curious myself how it develops. But I think AI for education and how that interacts with music, that's going to be a really interesting one to explore.
I'd like to thank Jocelyn Burnham from AI for Culture for taking the time to join me on the podcast, and thank you for listening. If you'd like to let me know what you think of the podcast, any requests for topics, or in fact anything else, you can email david@david-taylor.org or reach out on social media. You can find links to all of those at david-taylor.org. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your friends and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you next time.